very seriously in your work. Well, I think that, I think that that to some extent, people who have been working in diaspora, the Black Atlantic, have for some decades been kind of wrestling with the ghost of Herskovits. And I do think that to some extent, those who are involved in Black Atlantic studies, once again, you are an important exception, have been, kind of, basically kind of accepted the Gilroy approach to the Black Atlantic, and that has been roundly critiqued for the absence of Africa in the Atlantic. I think I think that that the focus on Creole communities and Creole formation is an excellent opportunity. It represents, as opposed to a kind of strategy to shut down the discussion of Africa in the Atlantic. I think and by that I simply mean the upshot of that of some of the most important proponents of the Creolist thesis is that these Africans all along the Atlantic littoral were Creole by culture, and ipso facto, it's really not important to consider Africa. But I think at the same time, so as opposed to shutting down the conversation, I think that we could take the existence of Creole communities as an opportunity to bridge the seeming polarities or the pond, because it provides for a very provocative and important conversation about 19th century Ghana, 19th century Nigeria. What is the relationship between the concept of the Yorubas and these Saros coming out of Sierra Leone and these Brazilians coming out of Brazil, and how do there's been a lot of work now on 19th century Lagos, and it becomes this is a very cosmopolitan site, very, very generative for what would become Nigeria. And so it's just an example, but I mean, we could go, to other places. The same thing in particular with respect to the Indian Ocean and communities all along the Swahili coast. Clearly, it has long been understood that they are, embedded in very complex relationships with other communities throughout that part of the world. And so I think that the discussion of the Creoles, or the so-called Creoles, is an excellent opportunity to explore the ways in which Africa and diaspora are not simply related with respect to the past, but as well with respect to subsequent developments, both during slave trades and afterward, and the ways in which what are seemingly disparate communities continue to relate to one another and have an ongoing conversation. So I think it's an opportunity. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, Bayo. I haven't seen you in a while.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Good to see you. Okay.
Thank you so much for coming. I loved your talk, and I especially appreciated your critique of scholarship that draws an equivalency between those in power and those disempowered, as you said, and the attacks that have been made on dependency theory. I know they're out of particular political economic conditions, and it certainly seems to me that in work on contemporary Africa, it's become, a sharp criticism to say that a work is has any kind of relation to dependency theory, right? That's to say that something is outmoded or simplistic, it seems, which is, you know, very unfortunate. And I'm wondering, how do we respond to that kind of framing of work that is drawing a distinction between those in power and those who are supported?
Yeah, I just think that we need more. Well, I think we need more of these kinds of discussions. You know, I don't know that these approaches are sufficiently troubled. You know, the lexicon has more or less been established as I see it, and I don't know. Maybe you guys should have a conference on that. You know, in your 21st year or something like that. It just have it out over here at Rutgers and talk about these kind of things. I don't know. It's a difficult thing. You know, as I read, and I'm sure as you know, I'm sure as is taking place here with Rutgers. I mean, as you hire people, or as you know, you have students coming in, and so forth and so on. I could look at a person's dissertation and know who he or she is working with, and that's good in one way, but in the other way, you want to see the scholarship. I'm getting very, very. This is probably inappropriate for me to say these things, but I think what I'm trying to say is that I don't see that the scholarship is moving in a way that really challenges these kinds of paradigms. I don't know, you know, how we do this outside of, you know, encouraging conversations about the process of knowledge production, and see you know how that. I mean, I would love to have that kind of conversation. I'm thinking now about how this relates to, you know, with respect to Africa, the production of knowledge on Africa, as is encouraged and developed in the North, in particular in a place like the U.S. or Europe, relative to what's coming out of the African continent itself. It's a very, very important conversation to have. And you know, where people are credentialed, who gets the grants, who gets to travel. All of this is very, very important questions to take a look at. And so hopefully we can, you know, encourage dialogue. Yes,
Yeah,
Carolyn.
I was just thinking about the period when there was quite a dialogue, like during the time, the 70s and 80s, when there were so many Africans in exile, and then you had people, well, I'm thinking mostly about New York, because you had all these solidarity groups, and the kinds of discussions that were going on were at such a high level. I mean, like, what's the nature of the state? How, you know, what about Africa is different and can generate new models and that type of thing. And that's one of the things that I think sometimes with diaspora studies, it's too far back.
Yeah.
I mean, historically.
Yeah.
Because the period when there's really this sort of very dynamic kind of interaction, and people were moving, you know, African Americans and West Indians are moving to Africa and getting into all kinds of trouble and also discussions.
Yes.
But I think that's a very fascinating time.
Yeah.
And then discussions about like dependency theory, but also some of the contributions of people like Cabral.
Yeah.
And Lumumba,
Yeah.
you know, and that's so. And I would like us to have more work done on that, you
Yeah.
know, on that time period, because I think that's when there was people had real major aspirations, and it looked like it was much clearer what the goals were.
Yeah.
But and I think that may be something that we probably should really, dig into, is that period.
Well, your comment